Okay. Hello. This is my second video I'm gonna do, and it will be a review of the David Lynch movie Blue Velvet. At the Alamo, they are playing all of the David Lynch movies, like in his memory and stuff. So I've seen all of them already, but I'm gonna try to see as many as I can in the theater. And whenever I do watch one, I'll review it here, and then probably like beginning or middle of April, I will kind of do a rank all of them. I think he has 10 movies. David Lynch is one of my favorite filmmakers. I'll just get into it. Blue Velvet is his fourth movie immediately after Dune, which I think is kind of universally considered to be the weakest Lynch movie, although a lot of that wasn't really in his control, as he had a lot of studio interference on that film and he didn't get final cut. In response, again, Blue Velvet, the movie just after this, he took like a lower budget and a pay cut in order to ensure that he got the final cut. And in my opinion, the result, Blue Velvet, is kind of like the first distinctly Lynchian thing that David Lynch made, and it kind of, in my opinion, comes to be like a definitive work within his filmography. So again, like before this, he'd done Eraserhead, which I think has like the surreal elements that you would come to see in all of his films, but it doesn't really capture a lot of the themes and ideas that he's particularly interested in the rest of his career. While Elephant Man is really, really great, and I'll get to that whenever I get to it. Hopefully I'll be able to see that one in theaters. While Elephant Man is really great, it is very un-Lynchian in that it's like pretty conventional narratively. And Blue Velvet is that interesting mix of themes that Lynch loves to explore and the surreal way in which he explores them. Those themes are like ideas of light and darkness and kind of how they coexist within the world. This idea of like this evil lurking just underneath something that feels normal or mundane. In this case, it's the suburbs. And then you have a couple of people who come to be very important collaborators with Lynch. Angelo Badalamenti, who is his composer for the rest of his career, as far as I know, and just creates these gorgeous synths and strings that really match well with the very vibrant worlds that Lynch creates. And in terms of performances here, you have Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern playing the two leads here. I was surprised, but when I thought about it, I realized that this is the only Lynch movie that both of them are in. Obviously, they're both in Twin Peaks: The Return, but even then, I think they probably only have like 2 scenes together. And that's obviously a show, not a movie. I think they are the 2 best Lynch actors. It's like a very acquired talent to be good in a Lynch movie, because you kind of have to, even if you don't know what's going on, you have to sort of surrender to the general themes or ideas of whatever movie you're acting in. And again, even if you're not entirely aware of how you should act in a certain scenario, you should be able to do it with like a sort of confidence, if that makes sense. I think both of these performers are very clear examples of knowing how to act in a Lynch movie. Also, just like the rhythm of the way they speak is very like kind of slow and relaxed and very dreamlike, especially Laura Dern in this movie when she's doing like her monologue about the robins is just like very relaxed and calm. And that in a way is what makes Blue Velvet so surreal, is like there's these very intense scenes and lots of like violence and just crazy stuff going on, but for the most part the film maintains a very like slow atmosphere and a very like relaxed pace, which I think is what makes it stand out in terms of mysteries. The scenes with MacLachlan and Dern just have like this bright-eyed optimism and just like general innocence to them that contrasts very interestingly with the darkness of the mystery. I guess that leads me to the other two performances here. Isabella Rossellini, who is like very unflinchingly vulnerable and maybe delivering the most, not powerful, but the most like challenging performance here. And then you have Dennis Hopper, who is just really unflinching and terrifying and has this like unpredictable way about him in terms of how he's performing that is very, very unnerving. There's almost like a surreal, supernatural force to Frank Booth as a character, but I think the point of Blue Velvet is that he is human. The ideas in this movie are basically contrasting Jeffrey and Frank and seeing like, Frank is obviously really demented and horrible, but in a sense, Jeffrey is Kyle MacLachlan's character. Jeffrey is somewhat close to being that demented if he were to like go the wrong way in life. I think that's the main idea of Blue Velvet, is that any person could be Frank Booth, and that just idea in and of itself is sort of terrifying. And again, Lynch is exploring this idea through Jeffrey, the protagonist, who is frequently towing the line between being like a sort of nosy, curious investigator and kind of like a creepy pervert. This is reflected in the first scene when he goes into Dorothy's apartment, where there's this very like awkward voyeuristic shot of him looking through like the slits in her closet door. And again, it starts with him going in wanting to get to the bottom of this mystery, but it ends with him asking her no questions about the mystery, and just from there becoming like more and more romantically involved with her. So again, you could argue the intention was good there, but the way that he went about it is a little creepy, and he comes off very weird. And Lynch doesn't really let him off the hook for this. He is seen as somewhat unlikable, even if he is very sympathetic, especially in comparison to the horrible human being that is Frank Booth. But there is a scene in here that I think is really, really incredible, in which Jeffrey is in bed after, this is sort of a spoiler, but after he like goes out on the town with Frank and like his gang, and they beat the crap out of him and stuff. And it's this scene where he's in bed the morning after, and he's sort of reflecting on the night as well as reflecting on a moment earlier in the film where he slaps Dorothy in bed. And it's very simple the way that Lynch kind of sets up this visual language of Jeffrey's thought process, but it's very much getting at this idea of, I've done something bad and now I've seen someone who does those bad things frequently, and I'm sort of having to come to grips with having something in common with this like pure agent of evil and violence and terror in the world. And I think it's really, really heartbreaking, and Kyle MacLachlan sells that scene really, really well. And Lynch, throughout his career, frequently looks at the contrast between light and darkness. A lot of people perceive his films to be very, very dark, and they are in a sense, but there's also generally in his work this idea of kind of light or love or whatever, goodness generally triumphing over that evil. And in my opinion, again, that contrast is very clear with the Jeffrey and Sandy relationship, and then the, dark, masochistic, nightmarish world of Frank and Dorothy. It kind of, to me, is like Lynch showing you like a pure white canvas and then a pure black canvas, and then making you ask the question, what are the properties of these two things? What's the property of good? What's the property of evil? Are they really like the clear, stark contrast that we perceive them to be, or are they just like part of a spectrum, or are they like very easily interconnected, and anyone that can be good can easily be evil, and vice versa. It's also exploring this theme of this innocence being perverted early on in life by just a very haunting experience, which is something that Twin Peaks does very often as well. And I think Blue Velvet is probably most indicative of Twin Peaks if you're going to compare it to any other Lynch thing, in that it's like this darkness lurking underneath the suburbs, and it's following these teenagers as they get kind of enveloped in this like supernaturally, surreally awful world that they find themselves in. Lynch is playing with this idea of the innocence being perverted, very obviously in a scene with Jeffrey and Frank, where Frank is like reciting the lines of Roy Orbison's In Dreams as the song is playing, and the song is very much about like Roy talking about in dreams he's going to like see the woman he loves, and he's gonna like be with her all the time, and that's like why he likes dreams essentially. But Frank is switching, he's literally perverting the message of the song to be no longer about love, but to be about fear, to be about Jeffrey always seeing Frank in his dreams or in his nightmares, because once you like come face to face with something that is this terrifying, it like drastically affects the way that you perceive the world, and even in like your subconscious dreams, it kind of stays with you, which I think is just a really interesting idea. And again, something that Lynch plays with very simply. I think Blue Velvet is a pretty simple movie at its core. Even visually speaking, there's a lot of scenes where he just kind of lets the camera stay still while characters are talking. He just kind of lets things unfold and very much lets the audience see for themselves and decipher for themselves what really he's getting at. It's a movie that, unlike a lot of Lynch's other stuff, doesn't necessarily have like a supernatural force in it. It's a little surreal, it's a little odd, but it like makes coherent, cohesive sense as a narrative, without having to get into like abstractions. But again, Lynch is very obsessed with these abstractions and obsessed with these nuances within the stories he's telling, and he gets into that really, really well, and I think in the most straightforward way in his entire career in Blue Velvet, which is why I really like this movie, especially in the context of his filmography. But if I'm going to be nitpicky, I do think it is pretty simple. I get new things out of it every time I watch it, but it's also a movie that I definitely get a little bit, and I'm a little bit more interested in those movies in Lynch's filmography, like Inland Empire or like Lost Highway, or The Return, where I really don't know what's going on, and it's always interesting to go back to those movies and just have a different perspective every time. Whereas with Blue Velvet, it is so straightforward, that I think it's pretty easy to come away with the exact same ideas every time. I guess the last thing I'll say about this movie is that it's also just a really fun time, and it's really entertaining. There's some lines of dialogue that are really corny because David Lynch is unapologetically like wholesome and optimistic about the way that life works. Another thing I want to briefly mention is the use of color in this movie. There's very vibrant blues and reds and greens. I know there's something going on with like the symbolism in red, and obviously blue is in the title, but I don't know. I probably should look that up. I'm interested in that, but I didn't. I don't know. That seems above my pay grade. Yeah, I just think this movie looks very vibrant and gorgeous, and again has like this very bright sentiment to it, even in the face of this darkness. The ending is almost overwhelmingly sappy and overwhelmingly happy, which I think works really well considering that a lot of moments in this movie are overwhelmingly dark. And again, it's that like very, very stark contrast that makes Lynch such an interesting filmmaker to me. I think the mystery is so fun to watch unfold. The way that Jeffrey and Sandy sort of get to the bottom of it, I think, is really interesting. It functions essentially as a noir in that it is like this combination of mystery and romance. But because it's like two teenagers, it has this, I don't know, it has more fun to it. I think that Dern and McLachlan's chemistry here just works so well and kind of works as the foundational anchor of this movie. The movie frequently will just like return to scenes of just them talking in a diner or in a car, and it's always really compelling, both as like the romantic tension between them, and they're always kind of gradually unfolding the mystery more and more, and they're also like two teenagers that are wrestling with things that feel far more mature than their age sort of permits them to understand, I guess. And yeah, I think it is that mixture of the mystery and the romance and the thematic resonance of this movie that makes it really great and kind of sets itself apart not only in Lynch's filmography, but also in like the genre of the noir generally. I would give this thing a 4.5 out of 5. And yeah, that's it. I think I'm going to be watching Wild at Heart next, which I've already seen, and I have thoughts on. I don't think is as good as Blue Velvet, but yeah. Bye-bye.
I walk with you.